The most valuable trade goods were never physical objects. This is the story of when trade routes became highways of knowledge and technology, a hidden transformation that built our modern world. By the end, you will understand how ancient commerce secretly wired our planet for innovation. We will follow the journey of an empty number that reshaped mathematics and a simple invention that supercharged communication across continents. What single innovation from the past do you believe most connects us today? Thousands of years before merchants crossed continents, the most profound exchanges happened just over the hill. A neighbor's village might have developed a better way to grind grain or a tougher breed of goat, and through simple barter, that advantage slowly rippled outward. This was not commerce on a grand scale, but something far more fundamental: the quiet, persistent sharing of survival itself. A new type of stone axe, traded for a basket of fish, could reduce the labor of clearing land. A hardier strain of wheat, passed from one family to another, could mean the difference between a full harvest and starvation. These were the first, fragile threads of a global network being spun, one practical solution at a time. The very spread of agriculture, the cornerstone of civilization, moved along these pathways. The knowledge of how to domesticate wheat or how to herd cattle did not explode into existence everywhere at once. It traveled slowly and inexorably from community to community, carried not by conquering armies but by ordinary people seeking a better way to live. This foundational impulse to share and adapt useful knowledge set an invisible precedent, proving that a community's greatest asset was not what it owned, but what it could learn from others. And as these small streams of innovation began to converge, they were destined to carve out much wider channels for the flow of ideas. Those small streams of innovation would eventually merge into a river of intellectual exchange along the most famous trade route in history. The Silk Road was a bustling intellectual highway disguised as a commercial one. While camel caravans carried silks and spices, their most precious cargo was often intangible, a constant flow of revolutionary ideas carried by the travelers themselves. Buddhist monks journeying from India did not just bring their faith into China, they carried entire cosmological models, new ways of understanding the universe and humanity's place within it. In the opposite direction, and at the very same time, Central Asian astronomers shared meticulously detailed star charts with scholars in Persia, combining observations from different corners of the world to create a more complete picture of the heavens. But the most transformative exchange was perhaps the most practical. The secret of papermaking traveled west from China, a technology far more valuable than any single shipment of finished paper. When this knowledge reached the Islamic world, it sparked a revolution. Suddenly, books became cheaper and more accessible than ever before. Libraries grew, literacy spread, and the work of scholars, poets, and scientists could be preserved and shared on an unprecedented scale. This single innovation, carried along the trade routes, fundamentally altered the intellectual landscape of half the world. Caravans were also mobile libraries, their saddlebags stuffed with medical texts detailing surgical techniques from one culture, architectural plans for new forms of vaulted buildings from another, and engineering concepts for water wheels and irrigation systems. This was not merely trade, it was a sustained, multi-century conversation between civilizations. The legacy of the Silk Road proves that when cultures connect, their greatest shared commodity is not material wealth, but the boundless wealth of the human mind. While the Silk Road connected continents by land, an even more expansive network was forming across the world's oceans. The vast sea lanes of the Indian Ocean became liquid highways where the very ships traveling the routes were a testament to the technology being shared. The most crucial innovation was the lateen sail, a triangular sail that originated among Arab sailors. This brilliant design allowed ships to sail against the wind, a capability that dramatically expanded where and when traders could voyage. It was so effective that cultures from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean eagerly adopted it, each integrating it into their own shipbuilding traditions. This was not just the trade of goods, but the trade of the very means of travel itself. Mastery of the sea also required mastering the sky. For centuries, merchants meticulously charted the complex monsoon wind patterns, knowledge that became a priceless, closely guarded secret. Understanding these seasonal winds meant an empire could control the flow of commerce, timing voyages with nature's own clock to cross vast distances with unprecedented speed and reliability. This environmental wisdom was as valuable as any gold or spice. In the bustling port cities that dotted these maritime routes, from Kilwa on the Swahili coast to the legendary Malacca in Southeast Asia, the world's knowledge gathered. Here, the Chinese magnetic compass, a revolutionary tool for navigation, met the Indian numeral system that would transform mathematics and was combined with the detailed navigational charts crafted by Arab cartographers. These ports were more than markets, they were the world's first global research and development centers. Alongside these complex technologies, the ships carried profound changes for daily life, transporting vital agricultural staples like bananas from Southeast Asia to Africa, and new irrigation techniques that turned arid lands into fertile fields. The sea itself taught humanity a powerful lesson that innovation is not anchored to one place, but can travel as fluidly and as powerfully as the ocean currents. Perhaps no single object better embodies this silent exchange than a simple sheet of paper. Its story begins in China, where it was first crafted from rags and plant fibers, a revolutionary alternative to heavy bamboo or expensive silk. For centuries, this knowledge was a state secret, a source of immense cultural and administrative power. But secrets have a way of escaping along trade routes. The pivotal moment arrived at the Battle of Tollas in 751, a clash between the Tang dynasty and the Abbasid Caliphate. Far more important than the battle's outcome were the prisoners taken, among them Chinese artisans who carried the priceless secret of papermaking into the Islamic world. The Abbasids grasped the staggering potential of this technology. They established vast paper mills in Baghdad and Damascus, refining the process with linen to produce smooth, durable sheets in volumes never before imagined. Suddenly, the cumbersome and expensive parchment made from animal skins and fragile papyrus scrolls were rendered obsolete. Paper was cheap, versatile, and strong. It democratized the written word, making books and documents accessible to scholars, merchants, and officials far beyond the royal court. This proliferation of paper became the very bedrock of the Islamic Golden Age. It enabled an explosion of scholarship, allowing for the systematic preservation of classical Greek and Roman texts that might otherwise have been lost to time, and the rapid dissemination of new discoveries in astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. The knowledge highway now had its perfect pavement. Centuries later, this technology would complete its westward journey, entering Europe through Spain and Italy. It was here that paper would meet its perfect partner, the printing press, creating a combination that would ignite the European Renaissance and reshape the world. One humble material, born from conflict and travel, amplified the human voice across continents and centuries. Yet the most profound cargo carried on these paper pages was not a product or a tool, but a concept, an empty space that held infinite potential. This was the journey of the number zero. In ancient Indian mathematics, this symbol, this idea of nothingness, was not merely a placeholder. It was a revolutionary philosophical concept representing the void from which all creation emerges. Indian scholars gave this abstraction a shape, a dot called sunya, and embedded it within a powerful new numeral system. For merchants and astronomers, this was a practical miracle. With a symbol for nothing, calculations that were once clumsy and complex suddenly became elegant and precise. A merchant could now easily distinguish a profit of 105 from 15, a clarity impossible with Roman numerals. This intellectual seed was carried west by the very trade networks it would later transform. Arab mathematicians, masters of both commerce and science, immediately recognized the power of this system. Scholars like Al-Khwarizmi studied and refined it, incorporating the Indian numerals, including the vital zero, into their own groundbreaking work on algebra. They called the zero cipher, meaning empty, and through their trading networks across the Mediterranean, this entire numeral system began its slow, inexorable march into Europe. For centuries, European merchants and scholars resisted, clinging to their familiar but cumbersome Roman abacuses and counting boards. The new numbers were even dismissed as dangerous and pagan. But the utility was undeniable. Imagine trying to calculate compound interest on a large shipment of goods using only Roman numerals. The system with zero was simply faster, more accurate, and far more adaptable. Its eventual victory was a quiet one, happening not in grand universities but in the counting houses of Italian merchants who needed to track complex, multinational deals. This abstract concept, born from philosophy, became the invisible engine of commerce, science, and ultimately, the digital age. The global network of trade had transmitted the very language of calculation itself, proving that the most valuable imports are often not things but ideas. But the most ambitious map was not drawn on paper or parchment. It was written in the stars, for merchants facing the trackless expanse of the desert or the empty horizon of the open sea. The night sky was their only reliable guide. This universal human need to not get lost fueled one of history's most profound collaborations. Chinese astronomers, with their meticulous court-sponsored observatories, created stunningly precise charts of celestial movements. Greek geometrical models of the cosmos, preserved and enhanced by Islamic scholars, offered a theoretical framework for the heavens. Indian mathematicians contributed complex calculations for predicting planetary positions. In the great trading hubs like Baghdad and Samarkand, these disparate streams of knowledge converged. Scholars from different worlds would gather, comparing their star catalogues, debating the paths of planets, and merging their observations into a single, more complete picture of the universe. The most beautiful tool to emerge from this fusion was the Astrolabe. Perfected in the workshops of the Islamic world, this intricate brass device was a portable cosmos, a masterpiece of engineering and art. By aligning its moving parts with the visible stars, a traveler could tell the time, calculate their latitude, and even determine the direction to Mecca. It was so valuable that it became a prized item of trade itself, a physical embodiment of shared knowledge passed from one civilization to the next. This collective celestial mapping had immediate, practical benefits. It made travel safer and more predictable, but its impact reached far beyond commerce. By pooling their observations, these ancient astronomers developed more accurate calendars, essential for agriculture and religious festivals. They refined their understanding of celestial mechanics, noticing subtle irregularities in the motions of the planets that would one day lead to a revolution in our conception of the solar system. The stars became a universal language, a silent text that every culture could read and contribute to. This shared project, born from the practical needs of trade, ultimately gave humanity a deeper, more unified understanding of its place in the cosmos. The pursuit of flavor on the high seas carried a hidden prescription for health. The same merchant ships laden with pepper, cinnamon, and cloves were also floating pharmacies, their captains and crews acting as unwitting agents of a global medical revolution. A merchant selling ginger root would not just extol its taste, but describe its use in his homeland for settling an upset stomach. A bale of turmeric, prized for its golden color, was also known for its power to reduce inflammation. This was how the sophisticated principles of Ayurvedic medicine from India began their westward journey, fascinating physicians in Baghdad and Cairo with their holistic approaches and powerful herbal remedies. In the other direction, Islamic medical texts, which had masterfully synthesized the wisdom of ancient Greece with the practices of Persia, traveled along these same routes. These volumes, like the Canon of Medicine by Avicenna, became foundational textbooks in European universities for centuries, bridging continents of thought. But the exchange was not limited to medicine alone. The transfer of crops like sugar, citrus fruits, and cotton was a package deal that included the entire knowledge system for growing them. Bringing a sugar cane plant from India to the Mediterranean was useless without the intricate knowledge of how to irrigate, crush, and process it. The movement of citrus fruits from Southeast Asia introduced new concepts of grafting and orchard management to the Middle East and North Africa. To manage these new agricultural treasures, rulers established elaborate botanical gardens, sprawling collections of the world's most useful plants. These were not merely displays of wealth, but living libraries and active research centers. Scholars would study these exotic specimens, documenting their growth, their needs, and their potential to heal. In this way, a garden in Spain or Persia became a catalogue of the entire known world's flora, a testament to the fact that a quest for a more flavorful meal had unexpectedly expanded humanity's medical toolkit, saving countless lives and weaving a tighter web of shared well-being across the planet. A master stonemason traveling from Rome to Persia carried no physical goods, but his mind held a blueprint more valuable than any gem. He understood the principles of the arch and the dome, architectural forms that allowed for vast, open interior spaces. This knowledge did not stay in one empire, it journeyed east with him, was refined by Persian builders into even more soaring, intricate structures, and then traveled further, its influence echoing in the grand mosques of the Islamic world and the towering cathedrals of Gothic Europe. These were not independent inventions, but a continuous conversation in stone and mortar, a technological thread woven across continents by the movement of people. At the very same time, on the other side of the world, a different kind of engineering was transforming humanity's relationship with the sea. Chinese shipwrights developed the stern post rudder, a simple yet brilliant steering mechanism mounted on the back of a vessel. Paired with the magnetic compass, another Chinese innovation, this gave sailors unprecedented control over their ships. Imagine the difference between trying to steer a massive trading vessel with a simple steering oar versus a central rudder connected directly to a tiller. It was a revolution in maritime control. These technologies did not remain secrets for long. They were observed, adopted, and adapted by Arab and later European sailors, becoming standard equipment on the ships that would ultimately connect the entire globe. On land, the most vital engineering transfers were those that mastered water itself. In arid regions from the Middle East to North Africa and beyond, the knowledge of building sophisticated water wheels, known as norias, and complex underground irrigation channels called qanats, traveled along the same routes as spices and silks. A community facing drought could learn from a traveler how to tap into a distant aquifer and channel its water for miles to turn a desert valley into a fertile garden. This was not merely trade, it was the direct transfer of survival skills. the literal greening of barren landscapes through shared ingenuity. These traveling masters, the stonemasons, the shipwrights, the water engineers, they were the unsung heroes of this knowledge network. They carried the most durable cargo of all, the practical intelligence embedded in their hands and minds, turning trade routes into the very construction sites of civilization. Amid the clamor of the marketplace, a more subtle exchange was always underway. The true currency in these hubs was not just silver or spices, but the very words needed to negotiate their price. In the caravanserais that dotted the Silk Road, a Bactrian merchant might barter with a Chinese official using Sogdian, a language that became a commercial bridge across Central Asia. Later, Arabic would ascend as a universal tongue of science and trade, from the ports of the Indian Ocean to the libraries of Spain. This was not merely about basic commerce, it was about the transmission of philosophy, legal concepts, and intricate engineering plans. A shared language allowed for the precise translation of a Greek geometrical proof or an Indian medical treatise, ensuring that a complex idea survived the journey intact. The most spectacular monument to this effort was Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Here, in a single institution, scholars who were Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Zoroastrian worked side by side. They did not simply copy ancient manuscripts, they actively translated the entire corpus of Greek knowledge, from the works of Aristotle to the medical texts of Galen, into Arabic. They absorbed the astronomical tables of India and the administrative wisdom of Persia. This massive, collaborative project did not just preserve knowledge that Europe had largely forgotten. It synthesized it, critiqued it, and built upon it, creating an entirely new and dynamic body of science. This linguistic cross-pollination left its mark on every language it touched. When a new technology arrived without a local name, the foreign word often stuck. The English word sugar comes from the Arabic sukar, which itself traces back to the Sanskrit shakara. Our algorithm is a Latinization of the name of the scholar Al-Khwarizmi. Algebra comes directly from the Arabic al-jabr, meaning the reunion of broken parts. These words are fossilized evidence of ideas on the move. Language acted as the essential software that ran the entire hardware of global trade. Without this intricate network of communication, allowing for the exact transfer of a mathematical formula or a chemical recipe, the great highways of thought would have fallen silent, and the most valuable cargo of all would have been lost in translation. Trust between strangers is a fragile thing, but one innovation built it into the very fabric of ancient commerce. The Lydian stater, a small lump of electrum stamped with a lion's head, was far more than a piece of precious metal. It was a promise. For the first time, a merchant did not have to assess the purity of a strange lump of silver or debate the worth of a bolt of cloth in a foreign language. The coin's mark guaranteed its value, a revolutionary concept that simplified transactions from the marketplaces of Anatolia to the ports of the Mediterranean. This was a technology of trust as vital as any sail or map. The idea spread like wildfire, and as it did, the coins themselves became tiny, portable billboards. Alexander the Great's coins carried his profile to the edges of the known world, broadcasting a message of unified power. Greek coins featured gods and goddesses, while Roman denarii depicted emperors and monumental buildings. A merchant in India might never see Rome, but he could hold a denarius and see the face of an emperor or the facade of a distant temple. These designs were not just art, they were a silent exchange of cultural and political ideas, a shared visual language that traveled in every money pouch. This standardization of value had a profound psychological effect. It reduced the immense risk of long-distance trade. A trader could now embark on a journey from Venice to Beijing with greater confidence, knowing that the silver in his strongbox would be recognized and accepted in countless cities along the way. This financial security directly encouraged more ambitious journeys, which in turn connected the great libraries of Alexandria with the astronomical observatories of Samarkand and the philosophical schools of India. The very concept of a universal measure of value began to resonate in other fields. Just as a stater or a drachma could measure the worth of 100 different goods, shouldn't there be a universal measure for the stars, for musical tones, or for the angles of a triangle? The reliability of coinage modeled a world where abstract concepts could be agreed upon and standardized across cultures. In this way, money did more than just buy and sell goods. It built the foundational trust necessary for strangers to share their most precious commodity, the groundbreaking ideas that would slowly weave the world together. The most ambitious map was not drawn on paper or parchment, but pieced together from 1,000 whispered accounts in crowded ports. For a merchant planning a voyage from Venice to the Malabar coast, a vague itinerary was not enough. The survival of his ship and its priceless cargo depended on transforming rumor into reliable lines on a chart. This urgent, practical need for precision is what resurrected one of the ancient world's greatest minds. Ptolemy's Geographia, written in 2nd century Alexandria, was more than a list of places. It was a revolutionary idea that the entire world could be mapped using a grid of longitude and latitude, a mathematical skeleton upon which the flesh of geography could be hung. For centuries, this text was lost to Europe, but Arab scholars recognized its brilliance. They preserved it, translated it, and crucially, corrected it, adding new knowledge from their own far-flung trading expeditions. When this refined Geographia finally journeyed back into Italy, it was a thunderclap. It provided European cartographers with a system, a way to move beyond symbolic drawings of the world and begin plotting it with scientific intent. Yet the most beautiful maps to emerge from this era were born not from theory, but from the calloused hands of sailors. Portolan charts, intricate maps of the Mediterranean and Black Seas, were stunningly practical. Drawn on vellum, their coastlines were crisscrossed with a web of rheum lines radiating from compass roses. A navigator could lay a straightedge from one port to another and follow the line to his destination. But the true magic of a portolan was that it was a living document, a collective maritime memory. Each line on the chart represented the accumulated experience of countless unknown captains, their soundings, their observations of coastal landmarks, their hard-won knowledge of safe harbors and treacherous currents. One sailor might have added a tiny island, another a note about a hidden reef. These maps were not the work of a single cartographer in a silent study, but a chorus of voices from the sea compiled over generations. To look at a portolan chart is to see the world through the eyes of the men who risked their lives to cross it. They were not just mapping coastlines, they were mapping confidence. Every new chart that was drafted and copied represented a profound shift in human consciousness. The parochial, self-centered medieval worldview, where a person's own village was the center of the universe, was being systematically dismantled by these sheets of vellum. They presented a world that was knowable, measurable, and above all, connected. The act of mapping was the ultimate act of synthesis, taking disparate stories from a Persian traveler, a Chinese admiral, and an Italian merchant, and weaving them into a single, unified vision. Each map was a testament to the collaborative power of the trade network, proving that the greatest discoveries are never made in isolation, but are charted collectively, one shared observation at a time. The secrets of a master artisan were as closely guarded as any royal treasure. Within the walled cities of the ancient and medieval world, trade guilds formed the very backbone of technological progress. These powerful associations of weavers, blacksmiths, glassblowers, and potters were far more than just business cartels. They were living libraries of specialized knowledge, the crucial nodes where techniques were perfected, protected, and quietly passed along the global trade network. When a master craftsman from Damascus traveled to a trading hub like Venice or Samarkand, he did not just bring samples of his work. He carried in his mind the precise temperature for forging the finest steel, or the secret formula for creating a dazzling crimson dye. In the workshops of these cities, these masters would meet, a silent, intense exchange taking place as they examined each other's wares, comparing the weight of a ceramic bowl or the flexibility of a woven silk. They were reverse engineering excellence itself. For centuries, the most sought-after secret in the world of craftsmanship was the Chinese formula for porcelain. This was not mere pottery. It was a material of magical properties, vitrified, translucent, and ringing like a bell when struck. European and Islamic potters struggled for generations to replicate it, producing only earthenware imitations. The secret was a complex alchemy of specific local clays and minerals, fired at intensely high temperatures, a process guarded by Chinese guilds with fierce determination. The knowledge did not escape through a simple commercial transaction. It was a slow leak of human capital. Skilled potters, sometimes lured by vast sums of money, sometimes taken as prisoners of war, carried fragments of the process westward. Through this migration of talent, the secrets of hard-paste porcelain finally reached the workshops of the Islamic world, and much later, taking root in the German city of Meissen. Within the guild halls, this cross-cultural pollination became part of the curriculum. An apprentice learning the art of metalworking would be taught the local methods, but his master might also demonstrate a revolutionary quenching technique learned from a Norse smith, or a new alloy recipe described by a traveling merchant from India. The guild was an informal university where the entire world's craftsmanship could be studied and synthesized. The quality of a finished object, a sword that would not break or a vibrant blue dye that would not fade, was its ultimate passport. It did not need a label of origin. Its very existence was a signature, a testament to a chain of borrowed knowledge that stretched across continents. While kings and explorers took the credit for connecting the world, it was these unsung artisans, with their hands covered in clay and soot, who were the true engineers of technological diffusion, quietly assembling our modern world one perfected craft at a time. A merchant might trade his spices for silk, but he often returned home with an entirely new way of seeing the world. The caravan routes and sea lanes carried the most profound cargo of all, the intangible architecture of belief itself. Buddhism did not simply appear in China, it traveled there, a slow and steady migration of monks and manuscripts along the Silk Road. As it moved, it did not remain unchanged. In China, it encountered the deep-rooted philosophies of Taoism and Confucianism, absorbing their emphasis on filial piety and harmony with nature. The serene, compassionate bodhisattva figures that became central to East Asian Buddhism were a product of this long conversation between cultures, a fusion of Indian metaphysics and Chinese artistic sensibilities. This was not a conquest, but a collaboration of the spirit. A similar intellectual homecoming was taking place in the opposite direction. The works of Plato and Aristotle, the bedrock of Greek thought, had been largely forgotten in a fractured medieval Europe. But in the vibrant intellectual centers of the Islamic world, scholars had not only preserved these texts, they had studied them, debated them, and written extensive commentaries on them. When these annotated versions of Greek philosophy began to filter back into Europe through centers of translation in Spain and Sicily, it was like a spark landing on dry tinder. The logical frameworks of Aristotle, encountered anew, would fundamentally reshape European scholasticism and help ignite the Renaissance. the very idea of citizenship and ethical governance was not confined to the Athenian agora. It was a topic of intense discussion in the market squares of Taxila and the royal courts of Persia. A trader from one civilization, exposed to the legal codes of another, might return home questioning why his own society was organized the way it was. This constant exposure to foreign worldviews did something remarkable. It cultivated a sense of intellectual relativity. When you see that another sophisticated culture holds a completely different, yet equally coherent, belief about the divine or the nature of justice, your own certainties begin to soften. The marketplace of ideas proved to be the most disruptive market of all, challenging entrenched power and encouraging a more inquisitive, self-aware humanity. This traffic in thought quietly laid the philosophical groundwork for a world that could one day think of itself as a single, interconnected community. The greatest libraries in history were never isolated fortresses of thought, but bustling terminals on the global knowledge network. Situated at the convergence of major trade routes, institutions like the Library of Alexandria, the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, and Nalanda in India thrived precisely because they were plugged directly into the world's intellectual current. Their location was no accident. The wealth that funded their collections, the paper and ink that filled their shelves, and the very ideas they preserved all flowed from the caravans and ships that passed through their host cities. These were not quiet halls for solitary study, but vibrant, noisy workshops of the mind. Scholars, translators, and copyists worked in teams, their efforts bankrolled by merchants and princes who understood that knowledge was the ultimate strategic resource. A ship docking in Alexandria's harbor might carry a merchant with a unique astronomical text from India, which would be immediately copied, translated into Greek, and added to the library's 500,000 scrolls. At Nalanda, the vast monastic university in India, thousands of students and teachers from across Asia gathered because it sat at the heart of terrestrial trade networks, a place where a Buddhist sutra from Sri Lanka could be compared with a Sanskrit grammatical treatise and a Chinese medical text. This created a critical mass of brainpower, a collision of perspectives that could not happen anywhere else. The scholars in these centers did not merely collect information, they actively synthesized it. They cross-referenced Greek logic with Indian mathematics. They compared Persian medical diagnoses with Chinese herbal compendiums. In doing so, they generated entirely new fields of inquiry and solved problems that no single culture could have tackled alone. The library was a refinery, taking the raw ore of information brought by trade and smelting it into the pure gold of universal wisdom. Its existence was a testament to a profound truth that commerce does not just transport objects, it builds the very institutions where the future is written. History's most destructive forces could also be its most efficient professors. The relentless march of armies along the very same paths used by merchants created a brutal, accelerated form of technology transfer. While trade fostered gentle, voluntary exchange, conquest often ripped knowledge from one society and implanted it directly into another. A captured engineer was a living textbook, a seized siege weapon a masterclass in physics and metallurgy. This was a dark, involuntary curriculum, but its lessons permanently altered the technological landscape. The Mongol Empire stands as the ultimate example. Their conquests were catastrophic, yet they forged a single, vast realm of enforced peace, the Pax Mongolica. For the first time, a traveler could journey from the borders of Poland to the coast of Korea under a single, if stern, authority. This unprecedented stability supercharged the existing trade routes, creating a protected corridor where not just silks, but the secrets of gunpowder, paper money, and advanced astronomy could race across continents faster than ever before. It was an empire built by the sword, but one that inadvertently wired Eurasia for an explosion of shared innovation. The flow of military technology was constant and pragmatic. The recipe for Greek fire, a terrifying incendiary weapon used by the Byzantine Empire, was a state secret of immense power. Yet through espionage, battle, and the capture of chemists, its basic principles eventually seeped outward, influencing the development of firearms and propellants. The humble stirrup, a simple foot support for a rider, was a revolutionary piece of military hardware. It allowed a warrior to stand and fight effectively from horseback, and its adoption from Central Asia into Europe fundamentally changed the nature of cavalry and medieval warfare itself. Designs for massive counterweight trebuchets capable of hurling stones to shatter castle walls were not invented independently in every land. They were observed, their captured blueprints studied, and their engineering principles copied and refined by the very armies they were meant to destroy. The true agents of this transfer were the anonymous soldiers and engineers who followed the armies. A metal worker from Damascus, conscripted or captured, might find himself smelting ore in a new land, bringing with him advanced techniques for producing superior steel. A Chinese artillery expert could teach the principles of gunpowder manufacture far from his home. When conflicts ended, these skilled individuals often settled where they were, marrying into local populations and establishing workshops. Their specialized knowledge, once dedicated solely to war, now seeped into the civilian economy. The same metallurgy that forged a sharper sword could now produce a more durable plowshare. The engineering principles behind a siege tower could be applied to building taller, more stable cathedrals. The logistics developed to supply a vast army on the move could be used to manage the food supply for a growing city. In this reluctant way, the sword did indeed write a chapter of technological history, its violent strokes unintentionally drafting the blueprints for a more connected and technologically advanced world. A single seed, carried in a merchant's pouch or tucked away in a ship's hold, held more transformative power than any chest of gold. This quiet, constant exchange of crops and farming knowledge was perhaps the most fundamental of all, reshaping not just economies but the very biological foundations of society. Long before the era of transatlantic voyages, the Islamic Green Revolution was already redrawing the agricultural map of the Old World. Along the bustling trade routes connecting India to the Middle East and North Africa, a wave of new staples began to appear. Hardy grains like sorghum and rice, along with lucrative crops like cotton and citrus fruits, traveled west from their origins, but the plants themselves were only half the story. They arrived as a complete package with the sophisticated knowledge to cultivate them. The Qanat system, a brilliant method of tapping into distant groundwater tables and channeling it through underground tunnels to prevent evaporation, moved out of Persia and into the arid landscapes of North Africa and Spain. This was not a simple barter of goods, it was the transfer of an entire ecological toolkit, turning previously marginal lands into blooming, productive oases. The result was a dramatic diversification of diets and a massive increase in food security. With more reliable harvests and a wider variety of crops that could be grown in different seasons and soils, populations began to swell. Cities, which had always been precarious in their reliance on a narrow agricultural base, could now grow larger and more stable, fed by a countryside that was suddenly far more fertile. Centuries later, this process would repeat on a hemispheric scale with the Columbian Exchange. The moment European ships reached the Americas, the planet's culinary and agricultural destiny was rewritten. The Old World received the potato, a tuber that would become a calorie-dense staple across Europe, and the tomato, which would later define the cuisines of Italy and the Mediterranean. Maize or corn spread across Africa and Asia, providing a new, high-yield grain. In return, the Americas received wheat, which would form the basis for new agricultural systems, and horses, which revolutionized transportation and hunting for many indigenous cultures. Sugar cane, brought from the Old World, would tragically reshape the Americas in a different way, driving the demand for plantation labor. The humble seed, more than any emperor's decree or general's conquest, quietly orchestrated the most profound demographic shifts in human history. Our modern dinner plates are living archives of these ancient journeys, a daily reminder that the most enduring legacy of trade is not found in monuments, but in the very food that sustains us. A shared calendar is one of humanity's oldest forms of social glue. For an empire stretching from the Mediterranean to Persia, or for a merchant planning a voyage from Cairo to Calcutta, a reliable way to mark time was not a luxury, it was an absolute necessity. How could a king collect taxes from distant provinces if harvests occurred at different moments? How could a caravan master coordinate with partners 1,000 miles away without agreeing on when to depart? This practical, urgent need to synchronize human activity drove the world's great civilizations to look upward, to the one clock they all shared, the sky. Astronomers in Babylon meticulously tracked the sun's path, defining the solstices and equinoxes with stunning precision. Half a world away, Mayan priests in their towering observatories were doing the very same thing, charting the cycles of Venus with an accuracy that still astounds us today. While these cultures had no direct contact, they were solving the same fundamental puzzle: how to impose order on the flow of time itself. The calendars they created were masterpieces of observation. The Chinese agricultural calendar perfectly aligned planting and harvest with the sun's movements, its lunisolar structure ensuring festivals honored both the heavens and the earth. The Islamic Hijri calendar, purely lunar, organized the rhythm of religious life and the timing of the Hajj pilgrimage. The Mayan long count calendar measured vast epochs, viewing time in grand cyclical sweeps. These were not just ways to count days, they were entire philosophies of time made practical. The concepts behind them did not always remain isolated. The idea of a 7-day week, for instance, likely traveled from Babylon into the Jewish tradition, then into Christianity and Islam, becoming a global standard through the very trade and cultural exchange it helped to facilitate. When a merchant in a bustling Indian Ocean port consulted a calendar to determine the next market day, he was tapping into a system that allowed him to synchronize with strangers. He knew that ships from Arabia would arrive with the shifting monsoon winds, that tax collectors would appear after the harvest moon, and that certain festivals would bring a halt to all business. This shared temporal framework turned chaos into coordination. It meant a farmer in the Nile Delta, a silk weaver in China, and a tax official in Baghdad were all, in a sense, reading from the same global script. The power to predict the seasons was the power to command an economy and unite an empire. By agreeing on when to plant, when to trade, and when to celebrate, disparate cultures began to move to the same rhythm, their collective actions harmonized by the silent, steady turning of the celestial spheres. A merchant's quest for gold sometimes led them into a far more mysterious trade. In the shadowy back rooms of bustling ports and the secluded workshops of ancient cities, alchemists pursued the ultimate transformation. They were the first chemists, and their network of secret knowledge stretched across the world, from the imperial courts of China to the libraries of the Islamic world and the cloistered monasteries of Europe. Their grand dream was the philosopher's stone, a legendary substance said to turn base metals like lead into pure gold and grant eternal life. While that ultimate prize remained elusive, their relentless experiments in trying to achieve it yielded a treasure trove of practical discoveries that quietly revolutionized daily life. The tools of their trade became essential technologies. In their search for purification, they perfected the art of distillation, designing intricate glassware to boil and condense liquids. This same process would later be used to create potent perfumes in Persia, strong spirits across Europe, and even pure medicinal alcohols. Their experiments with minerals and acids, often documented in deliberately cryptic language to protect their secrets, led to the creation of vibrant new pigments for artists and more effective medicines for physicians. The brilliant red pigment vermilion, for instance, was first synthesized by Chinese alchemists, and the knowledge of its creation traveled west along the Silk Road, forever changing the palette of art. This flow of chemical knowledge was a continuous conversation across centuries. Practitioners in Alexandria built upon the metalworking techniques of ancient Egypt. Their writings were then preserved, translated, and vastly expanded by Arab scholars like Jabir ibn Hayyan, a foundational figure who introduced the painstakingly careful experimental method and classified substances in new, systematic ways. Centuries later, when his works were translated into Latin in Europe, they ignited a new wave of alchemical fervor. The trade in these secrets was a dangerous game of espionage and coded correspondence, where a single formula for a new acid or a better alloy could be worth a fortune. These early scientists, dismissed by some as mere mystics, were in fact building the very foundation of modern chemistry inside their smoky laboratories. Their failed attempts to make gold ultimately produced something far more valuable, a rigorous method of inquiry that taught humanity how to truly manipulate the material world. The clothes on your back are a living archive of these ancient technological journeys. Within the intricate patterns of a woven tapestry or the deep blue of a prized garment lies a hidden history of industrial espionage and global collaboration. The textile trade was never just about finished cloth. It was a constant, fierce competition over the machines and methods to create it. The drawloom stands as a perfect example, a complex device that used hundreds of strings to lift individual warp threads, allowing a weaver to create elaborate pictorial scenes. This engineering marvel, likely perfected in the workshops of Syria, did not stay there. It traveled east to China, where artisans used it to produce silks of unimaginable complexity. And then the knowledge of the machine itself traveled west again, carried into medieval Europe, where it revolutionized the production of luxury tapestries for castles and cathedrals. The machine itself was a migrant, its blueprints carried in the minds of traveling artisans. But the true secret, the very source of the most coveted fabric, was biological. For over 1,000 years, the Chinese Empire maintained a monopoly on silk by guarding the secret of sericulture. The process of cultivating silkworms, carefully unraveling their precious cocoons, and spinning the delicate threads was a state secret of immense economic power. Its value was comparable to that of a top-secret microchip designed today. This secret, however, was too valuable to contain. According to legend, it was smuggled out in the 4th century, hidden in the headdress of a princess who carried silkworm eggs and mulberry seeds to her new husband in cotton. From there, the knowledge inevitably fanned out along the Silk Road, reaching Byzantium and then the rest of the world, breaking a monopoly that had lasted for millennia. The race was not just to make the cloth, but to color it. The quest for vibrant, lasting dyes created a global chemical industry. The deep blue of indigo, extracted from a specific plant, was cultivated and processed from India to Central America. The brilliant red of cochineal came from a tiny insect that lived on cacti in the Americas, and after the Spanish encountered it, this dye became a massive transatlantic export, more valuable by weight than silver. The knowledge of how to use mordants, metallic salts that fixed dyes to fabric, was equally guarded. A master dyer in Turkey might know that using alum would make a madder root dye a brilliant, lasting red, while a different mordant would produce a rust orange. These recipes were trade secrets passed from master to apprentice, and as those apprentices traveled, the techniques spread. The vibrant colors of a Persian carpet or the specific purple of a Roman senator's toga were not just aesthetic choices, they were markers of status and identity made possible by a globally sourced palette of chemicals and plants. This entire ecosystem of craft knowledge, the looms, the silkworms, and the dye recipes, formed the foundational bedrock for what was to come. The mechanization of the Industrial Revolution, with its spinning jennies and power looms, did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the direct descendant of thousands of years of accumulated textile craft, a global inheritance of technique that was finally amplified by steam and steel. Every thread in the fabric of history connects to a distant innovation, proving that what we wear has always been a map of human ingenuity on the move. The night sky was humanity's first map, but the sea demanded something more reliable. Polynesian voyagers, masters of the world's greatest ocean, navigated not by following coastlines, but by memorizing a celestial sphere they called the star compass. They read the subtle patterns of swells, the flight paths of birds, and the shimmer of bioluminescence in the water, weaving environmental data into a mental chart that could guide a canoe across thousands of miles of open Pacific. This was a profound, holistic science of wayfinding passed down through chance and direct experience. On the other side of the world, another revolution was brewing in a small dish. In China, during the Song dynasty, geomancers using lodestone spoons for fortune-telling noticed a consistent pattern. They began to magnetize iron needles by rubbing them with a lodestone, then floating them in a bowl of water. The needle would always swing to point north-south. This simple observation was harnessed for navigation, evolving from a floating needle in a bowl to a dry compass mounted on a pivot. Suddenly, a captain could know his direction even when clouds blotted out the sun and stars for days on end. He was no longer a slave to the coastline, chained to landmarks. He could now venture into the deep, blue heart of the ocean with confidence. This technology did not remain in Chinese waters for long. Through the vibrant trade networks of the Indian Ocean, the magnetic compass was adopted and refined by Arab and Persian navigators, who often combined it with a rudimentary version of the Astrolabe for taking latitude readings. It was this synthesized toolkit that Portuguese explorers, driven by their desire to find a sea route to the spice-rich Indies, eagerly absorbed. Under the patronage of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese caravels became floating laboratories of maritime technology. They merged the Arab astrolabe, the Chinese compass, and their own detailed portolan charts of the African coast. Each voyage down the west coast of Africa was a data-gathering mission. They recorded currents, winds, and stars, constantly refining their maps and techniques. The successful rounding of the Cape of Good Hope by Bartholomew Dias was not just a triumph of courage, it was a victory of assimilated knowledge. This created a self-reinforcing cycle of discovery. Better navigation allowed for longer voyages, which brought contact with new cultures possessing their own unique technologies and knowledge. A Portuguese captain might trade for spices in India, but he would also acquire a detailed local chart of the monsoon patterns or observe a new ship design that was faster and more stable. He would bring this intelligence home, where it would be integrated into the next generation of maps and ships, pushing the boundaries of the known world just a little further. The quest to simply know where you are has always been the driving force behind knowing what else is out there. Today, that ancient impulse lives on not in a floating needle, but in the silent, constant chatter of global positioning satellites, the modern heirs to the first stargazers who dared to sail beyond the horizon. This river of shared ideas required a powerful engine to flow, and that engine was fueled by wealth. The immense profits from long-distance trade did not just fill royal treasuries or merchant coffers, they built the very architecture of innovation. Consider the bustling ports of the Indian Ocean or the banking houses of Renaissance Italy. The silver and gold flowing through these hubs represented more than luxury, they were liquid potential. A merchant who made a fortune on a single voyage from Venice to Alexandria was not merely rich, he now possessed the means to fund something entirely new. This capital could bankroll a scholar for years, allowing him to translate ancient texts without worry. It could purchase the expensive materials for an alchemist's experiments or fund the construction of a new observatory with precision instruments. The economic surplus created by global commerce meant that a society could now support a dedicated class of thinkers, artists, and inventors, people who were freed from the daily struggle of farming or crafting basic goods. Their only job was to think, to create, and to discover. The most famous patrons of this new age were families like the Medicis of Florence. Their vast banking empire, built on financing trade across Europe, allowed them to become the ultimate sponsors of the Renaissance. They commissioned sculptures from Donatello, paintings from Botticelli, and architectural plans for domes that seemed to defy physics, but their patronage was not limited to art. They also funded scientists, cartographers, and engineers, understanding that knowledge itself was a form of power and prestige. This model was replicated by rulers across the world. Sultans in the Ottoman Empire used tax revenue from the vibrant Silk Road to establish grand universities and libraries. In Ming China, the state sponsored massive encyclopedic projects and naval expeditions, investing the wealth from commerce directly into the pursuit of knowledge. This created a powerful, self-reinforcing cycle. Trade generated the wealth. That wealth was invested in people and institutions dedicated to innovation. Their discoveries then led to new, desirable trade goods, finer porcelain, more accurate navigational charts, stronger alloys, and to more efficient methods of trade itself, like improved ship designs or double-entry bookkeeping. The pursuit of profit and the pursuit of knowledge became inextricably linked, each one pushing the other forward in a dance of mutual advancement. Prosperity, once an end in itself, had transformed into the primary fuel for the engine of human progress. The path to a holy city was often paved with intellectual discoveries. For the devout pilgrim, the journey was a spiritual duty, but their footsteps traced the very same roads used by merchants carrying silk and spices. These religious travelers became some of history's most effective vectors for knowledge, carrying entire libraries of science and culture in their minds and saddlebags alongside their sacred texts. Buddhist monks making the long trek from India to China did not merely translate sutras. In the quiet scriptoria of mountain monasteries, they also meticulously rendered complex Indian astronomical charts and mathematical treatises into Chinese, introducing revolutionary concepts like trigonometry to a new audience. Their faith provided the endurance for the perilous journey, while their scholarly minds ensured that the cargo of knowledge arrived intact. In the Islamic world, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca, the Hajj, functioned as a massive, recurring intellectual summit. Scholars from across the vast Muslim empire, from Spain to Central Asia, would converge on the holy city, but the journey itself was as important as the destination. A learned man from Cairo would stop at the great libraries of Damascus or Baghdad, exchanging ideas with fellow intellectuals, debating new medical theories, and copying texts on algebra before continuing his sacred duty. These pilgrims were a living network, their movements synchronizing the intellectual heartbeat of a civilization. Similarly, medieval Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem while seeking spiritual redemption could not help but be awestruck by the advanced Arab societies they passed through. They witnessed sophisticated hospitals, studied architectural marvels with their soaring arches and domes, and encountered medical knowledge far surpassing their own. When these weary travelers finally returned to Europe, they brought back more than relics. They carried the blueprints for a renaissance, seeding their homelands with new ideas in medicine and engineering. Even remote monasteries, seemingly isolated in their devotion, became crucial repositories of knowledge precisely because they were designated stops on these major travel routes. They offered sanctuary to the traveler and in return received a constant influx of new ideas from the wider world. Faith provided the irresistible motivation and the communal safety net that made these long, perilous journeys possible. In this way, the quest for spiritual enlightenment quietly fueled the exchange of earthly knowledge, proving that the road to a deeper understanding of the world was often walked by those seeking a deeper connection to the divine. The very caravans that carried paper and mathematics also carried a silent, devastating passenger. This was the dark paradox of connectivity, where the highways of knowledge could become conduits for catastrophe. The most infamous of these was the Black Death, a pestilence that raced along the Silk Road in the 14th century, carried in the fleas on rats that stowed away in grain sacks and trade bales. The loss of life was almost unimaginable, wiping out perhaps half of Europe's population in a few terrible years. Whole villages were emptied and cities fell into a stunned silence. Yet from this profound tragedy emerged a strange and unintended revolution. With so many laborers dead, the survivors found their work was suddenly in high demand. The rigid feudal system, which had tied peasants to the land for generations, began to crumble under the weight of this new economic reality. Workers could now demand higher wages and better conditions as lords competed for their scarce labor. This desperate need for efficiency in the face of a shrunken workforce became a powerful engine for invention. Why rely on 10 men to do a job if a clever machine could allow one man to do it? This pressure spurred the development of labor-saving devices, from improved plows to more sophisticated mining pumps, laying the early groundwork for the mechanization that would one day define an era. But this story had a grim mirror half a world away. When European ships reached the Americas, they brought with them an invisible arsenal of diseases like smallpox and measles, against which indigenous populations had no immunity. The result was a demographic collapse so severe it shattered entire civilizations. Societies that had built astronomical observatories and complex urban centers were decimated, their elders and master artisans dying before they could pass on their knowledge. Vast libraries of technological tradition, from unique metallurgical techniques to sophisticated agricultural methods, were lost forever in a single, tragic generation. This catastrophic loss did not just halt progress, it actively erased it, creating a void that colonizing powers would quickly fill. In the wake of every great plague, however, humanity was forced to learn. Outbreaks forced a painful but necessary reckoning with medicine and public health. Cities began to implement quarantine measures, understanding that isolation could slow an invisible enemy. The study of anatomy advanced as doctors sought to understand the body's mysteries in a race against death. Even urban planning evolved, with a new emphasis on cleaner water supplies and less crowded living conditions to prevent the spread of illness. The shared threat of disease, born from our own interconnectedness, ultimately compelled us to build smarter, more resilient societies. This is the double-edged sword of a connected world. The same routes that deliver a revolutionary idea can also deliver a devastating plague. reminding us that every step toward greater exchange carries with it both the promise of a shared future and the peril of a common vulnerability. That ancient impulse to connect distant worlds now powers our own. The same principles of reliability and efficiency that guided a camel caravan across the Gobi Desert are hardwired into the global supply chains that deliver a package to your door. The Mongol Empire's Yam courier network, a relay of horsemen stationed at outposts, was an ancient internet for urgent messages. A rider would carry a command from the capital only to the next station, where a fresh rider and a fresh horse would take over, ensuring the message moved at maximum speed without delay. This is the exact same principle that guides a data packet across the modern internet, hopping from one server to the next along the most efficient path. The package on the delivery truck is just the modern incarnation of that Mongol courier, handed off from plane to warehouse to van until it completes its journey. Standardization, another ancient necessity, has scaled to a global level. Centuries ago, a merchant ship's bill of lading was a trusted document that described a cargo's contents and destination, a vital piece of information that traveled separately from the goods themselves to prevent fraud. The need for a predictable, uniform way to move things led directly to the 20th century's containerization revolution. The simple, standardized shipping container is the direct descendant of that bill of lading, a universal box that fits seamlessly on a ship, a train, or a truck, dramatically reducing cost and complexity. This invisible framework of logistics is the skeleton of our modern world. And just as the Silk Road carried silks and spices, our planet is now woven with fiber optic cables that carry a new kind of precious commodity, data. The internet is the ultimate virtual trade route, where software, digital media, and financial transactions are the new luxuries flowing between digital city-states. The ancient problem of moving valuable things safely and quickly over vast distances has never gone away. We have simply translated it into a new domain, building our own highways for knowledge that operate at the speed of light. Our journey reveals that the most profound legacy of those ancient roads and sea lanes was never the treasure they carried, but the conversations they made possible. The real wealth was in the invisible cargo, the shared ideas that quietly built our modern world. That empty number, 0, became the bedrock of our digital universe. The simple compass in a captain's hand guided us to a globalized planet. The humble sheet of paper amplified the human voice across centuries. These were not isolated miracles, but the fruits of a sustained, collaborative project that spanned continents and cultures. This history teaches us a powerful truth, that human progress is rarely, if ever, a solitary achievement. It is a chorus of countless voices, a tapestry woven from threads gathered across the entire world. The next time you look at a map, or use a number, or read a book, see it for what it truly is, a monument to this ancient network of shared minds. This story invites us to look at our own hyper-connected world and recognize the same forces at play, to value the free and open exchange of ideas that continues to drive us forward. If this exploration into the hidden highways of history resonated with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into the mysteries of our past. We would love to hear which traded innovation you find most fascinating, so please share your thoughts in the comments below.